Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update. Before we get into things, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And at the end of the video, if you like what you saw, hit that like button as well. We got plenty of videos coming out daily. And when there's active storms threatening the United States, multiple throughout each day for you there. A lot to talk about. We're one day out from the peak, the climatological peak of hurricane season, which is tomorrow, September 10th. Currently in the Atlantic Basin, there are two named storms with two other tropical waves, one of which has a high likelihood of being the next name on the list, which would be Sally. Broad overview of the Atlantic Basin, a lot of activity out there, a lot of convection, a lot of thunderstorm activity, and some of those thunderstorms have organized enough to get names. We have Paulette and Rene. Paulette is the farthest west right now, and this is battling some dry air, and it's battling a lot of wind shear too. On infrared imagery like we're viewing here, it's not all that evident. It looks pretty healthy with the thunderstorm activity. Cold cloud tops around that center. You can see that by the white shadings and the black. That means those thunderstorms are vertically structured, higher in the atmosphere, colder cloud top temperatures, stronger storms. But when we switch things up and show you the visible satellite imagery, different picture here. We can see the evidence of wind shear, pretty obvious, where we can see the exposed low-level center with all the convection activity being offset or blown to the northeast thanks to southwesterly wind shear. We call this a tilted system thanks to that wind shear, and it's moderate right now. It is expected to get even a little bit stronger by the end of the week, but then drop off a bit. That's why the intensity forecast for Paulette is kind of a hard forecast here, because with its slow movement and the wind shear, it's probably going to level off where it currently is. But once that wind shear drops off, we could see a brief burst of intensification as it moves to the north and west. And by that point in the forecast time frame, by the end of the weekend, this puts Bermuda in its crosshair. So right now looking like a possible threat to Bermuda by early next week, say by Monday afternoon, Monday evening. At this point in time in the forecast, is the far end of that forecast cone. We're up to 60-mile-an-hour winds of a tropical storm. Now, with this cone of uncertainty is what we call it, the cone gets larger the farther out you go because the confidence is lower. So technically, the center of that storm could track anywhere within this forecast cone, could track farther to the north and east, completely missing Bermuda, or even move to the south of it, or go straight into Bermuda by the time we get to early next week. So certainly bears watching there if you're watching us from Bermuda. How do the computer models see things? Well, I'm going to show you here is the GFS ensemble. It's the GFS model. The American model run 21 different times with 21 members, and what we do with that is we change the initialization, the starting point, the variables just slightly to get a different outcome. Pretty good agreement here early on, probably for the next 24, 36 hours. But then notice what happens. There gets a larger and larger spread, more divergence the farther you get out in time. That mimics why that cone of uncertainty is larger the farther out you go, because the uncertainty grows the farther out in time you get. And this is a pretty good example of that with the GFS ensemble, showing a wide spread of possible scenarios or solutions to this storm as it goes farther out in the forecast time frame. Now, I want to show you something interesting here, too, because Paulette and where it's forecast to go in the central Atlantic, a lot of times that area does not lead to a westward turn towards the eastern United States. Now, it's rare, but it has happened before, and as recently as 2018, you remember Florence peaked at a Category 4 hurricane, and I plotted the track on here with Hurricane Florence. And when you look at this, it's kind of interesting to see because you can get a feel for the overall steering patterns that influence the path of Florence. So out here, the farthest east there was a big dome of high pressure, Bermuda High. Remember we talked about that yesterday in the video? And this was steering the storm off to the west. And then notice the storm started to feel a weakness in that ridge and started to take its turn off to the north and west. I remember watching this and we were saying, you know what, if it takes that escape route, we'll be good. If not, it's going to track farther west because it got caught under another building ridge that suppressed it from taking that escape route. And that's exactly what happened here, and it continued off towards the west and eventually made landfall in North Carolina and had a lot of devastating flooding associated with it. So not saying that that's going to happen with Paulette by any means at all, but certainly this part of the Atlantic we can't just write off that it wouldn't be a threat at all to the United States. Right now the only land threat looks to be Bermuda at the moment, but that can certainly change. Another look at the satellite infrared imagery here. We'll go over to Rene now, which is right behind Paulette. And I'm showing a 24-hour loop this time because something interesting happened last night. Is it showed a real rapid weakening. It almost fell apart. It was downgraded to a tropical depression overnight, and then notice in the last several frames, it started to kind of come back to life. We had a burst of convection or thunderstorm activity around that center, and then in the last few frames here, right up till it ends, currently, it's showing that thunderstorm activity is starting to kind of fall apart just a little bit more as it tracks on off towards the west. Right now, barely a tropical storm. You need 39 miles per hour or greater. It's at 40 with gusts up to around 50, moving a little bit faster at 13 miles an hour. When we look at this on the visible satellite imagery, this storm as well is battling some wind shear. Not as strong and not out of the southwest, but can you tell where that wind shear is coming from? Here's all the convection. Here's the low-level center being exposed. So we have that wind shear coming from the east in this particular scenario here. That is expected to go down a little bit. So this is why this storm is actually, expected to develop into a Category 1 hurricane before it takes that turn off towards the north-northwest. And this storm is expected to be no threat to any land, although it will be the stronger, likely as it looks right now, of the two systems currently out there in the Atlantic basin. I want to show you another image here, water vapor imagery. This is how we can kind of depict where the dry air and moist air is. Well, it's how we do depict where the dry air and moist air is. Dry air is the yellow and orange shadings, the moist, the green, whites, and blues. So Paulette and Rene. Paulette, with that wind shear, it's also feeding dry air and getting pulled into the circulation of Paulette, which will likely lead to some weakening or sustained organization here. No real strengthening or weakening, kind of plateauing over the next 24 to 36 hours or so. But notice Rene not dealing with as much dry air right now. However, it is battling some of that wind shear. Now, the second thing that I want to show you with this image, how it's so blown out, is you notice how close these two systems are. And I had somebody in the YouTube stream yesterday ask, they are pretty close. Can they interact or combine? Do you remember we talked about this with Hurricane Laura and Marco when they were both in the Gulf of Mexico, and there was this big thing that they were going to combine into some superstorm? Well, obviously that didn't happen, and it can't happen, and it's not going to happen here. However, when they get within 1,200 miles of each other, which they are, around 800 miles apart from one another, they can begin to interact with each other and kind of gauge their steering and throw off their steering a little bit. So that's what we'll have to watch here, and that's what also makes this forecast for both Rene and Paulette just a little bit more difficult. One gets stronger than the other. It can start to alter the forecast track for the other. So this is called the Fujiwara effect and Fujiwara interaction, and sometimes it's happened before. If one storm is stronger than the other and they get so close, the stronger storm can actually absorb the other. It doesn't make some superstorm, but they can interact for sure, and they start to pivot around one another if they get really, really close. Outside of that, we have two other waves to talk about. One that's off the eastern seaboard. This has been downgraded slightly. Yesterday when we talked, it was 40% chance. Now we're at 30% within the next 48 hours or 5 days. This has been coined Invest 94L, investigative area 94L in the Atlantic Basin. It's this cluster of storms here that's kind of offset. The low-level center is right out here. All the convection is displaced off to the south and southeast there. This is going to move its way slowly towards the west with some shower activity. The environment overall in this area isn't all that conducive for it to develop. It has the warm waters, but there's a lot of wind shear there too. And as it moves towards land, we could just see an increase in some shower activity and rough surf. However, on the other side of the Atlantic, coming off the coast of Africa within the next 24 hours, is this tropical wave here. And once it hits the coastline, the atmosphere is pretty conducive for the overall environment for it to develop. 50% in the next 48 hours, 80% within the next 5 days. I also want to draw your attention to I don't want to call this a cone, but the area of likely development has started to turn a little bit off towards the northwest. That is going off of the most recent long-range computer models. This is likely going to become Sally, and yesterday most of these models were keeping this farther west for a longer period of time, potentially threatening the Leeward Islands, the Caribbean, and maybe even potentially the United States. That has since changed a little bit, and it looks to be shifting it a little bit farther to the north and west, maybe taking a similar track to what Paulette and Rene will go through in the next couple days. So that certainly needs to be watched. This will become Sally, and guess what? Behind that, there's even more waves, and some of the models take that and move that farther to the west. So things will unfold here. We're getting to the most active time of the season. The next names up on the list, by the way, I said Sally, and then we got Teddy, Vicky, and Wilfred. And once we get past that, we go into the Greek alphabet, which the only other time that's happened was back in 2005 when we had overall 27 named storms out in the Atlantic Basin. All right, that's it for today on your Wednesday. If you have a question, don't be afraid to ask. Find me on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. We'll see you tomorrow.